Hi everyone, my name is TJ and I'm going to be presenting my thesis titled Medical Mistreatment of Women in U.S. Prisons, Issues and Ethics. Beginning with a brief overview or introduction of this topic, women are an increasing population in prisons, with over 200,000 women in prisons as of 2018. I'm going to be looking at and talking about the history and past research, including some key issues that were identified and the theories and methodologies that were mentioned in the research. I will also be going over some ethical concerns or quandaries that arise in this topic. Beginning with key issues, I first want to talk about the history of negligence in prisons. Historically, prisons have not regulated, either at the federal or state level, how medical mistreatment occurs and what kind of treatments should be followed with medical emergencies in prison. One notable case is Estelle v. Gamble. A situation occurred where a prisoner was working and had a 600-pound hay bale fall on him. He experienced a lot of pain and was simply put into solitary confinement for his refusal to work because of how severe his pains were. He brought the case to court and fought against and argued with the 8th and 14th Amendments, which protect his personal rights and also protect him from cruel and unusual punishment. And he stated that forcing him to work or go into solitary confinement because of his lack of medical treatment was in fact cruel and unusual punishment. Unfortunately, the case did not go in his favor, and they decided that what the prison did was simply deliberate indifference rather than an actual case of cruel and unusual punishment. Deliberate indifference is a situation where prisons may not be willfully doing things to wrong or harm a prisoner, but rather they're just looking the other way, or they are being willfully ignorant of the situations that are happening for prisoners. And this is where medical mistreatment flourishes. With regards to women in particular, gynecological health and mental health are the two areas where this is seen most heavily. Gynecological health covers menstruation, periods, pregnancies, abortions, and preventative health care for things like cervical and breast cancer. And we see that women have been very heavily mistreated or ignored or insulted for these situations that are unique to them. And nothing has happened regarding it because it is simply deliberate indifference. As for mental health, both pre-existing and new conditions that arise within prison, researchers have found that women are not listened to, or they are ignored for their mental health, or they are often not taken seriously with regards to what they are experiencing, because they are women and because they are being deliberately ignored so that nothing has to be done in the prison. Shifting to key theories, the two that I found were disparate impact theory and routine activities theory. Disparate impact theory believes that oppression occurs to protected or underrepresented groups when legislation is made that ignores them or does not consider them in an organization. In this case, the organization is prisons. The legislation is the 8th and 14th Amendments and the treatment and the medical treatment that is established within those prison systems, and the underrepresented group is women. And the research that I found argues that women are being affected by disparate impact theory because they are not being considered when medical practices are made. It is only the male prisoners who historically have been in prison longer. And that is where the basis of medical treatment is founded. And since women have not been considered in this foundation of medical treatment in prisons, they are the underrepresented group that gets oppressed by the lack of representation for them. The other theory that I mention is routine activities theory, which suggests that a crime occurs with the right set of circumstances. In this case, the circumstances are a suitable target, a likely offender, and the absence of a capable guardian. This is a more abstract concept wherein the prison system itself is the likely offender, women are the suitable target, and legislation or the lack of legislation is the absence of a capable guardian here. And this is not quite suggesting that prisons are actively trying to harm women in prison without legislation, but rather that because there is no legislation or medical practices set in place to treat women, this is the perfect opportunity for crime to grow and flourish. And it is a set of circumstances that are perfect for a crime to go unnoticed. The methodologies that I noticed most heavily in this research were interviews and surveys. Both of these are very great at collecting qualitative data and firsthand experiences that women who have either previously been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated experience. And it is where a lot of the research got its information on how women are treated in prison. Surveys are a little stronger in also collecting quantitative data, which allows for a numerical value to be formed of all of this information. But both of these are limited in the regards that they can be very inaccurate. When you're dealing with a population who has experienced traumatic events, such as medical mistreatment or malpractice, there is a very strong likelihood that there might be some exaggeration of the events that they went through or some underrepresentation of the events that they went through. So either extreme of the inaccuracies. We could see that women might not feel comfortable or they might fear punishment from the prisons they're in if they report the things that are happening to them, or women might be outraged at the things that have happened to them and they over-report it, or they don't remember as well what has happened to them, so they over-exaggerate the events that they had to go through. And because it's so easy for these to happen in surveys and interviews, they prove to be very weak in that regard. I'm going to switch over to ethical concerns now. There are two ethical concerns that I brought up in my paper: the protection of civil and legal rights and the refrainment from discrimination. But I'm going to be discussing an ethical quandary within the protection of civil and legal rights specifically. So the protection of civil and legal rights comes from the American Correctional Association. Their code of ethics states members shall respect and protect the civil and legal rights of all individuals. And the issue that I bring up is in coerced sterilization, which is spoken about in both Kluchin and Fofana's research. This suggests that women have had forced sterilizations done to them, or that they have signed documents to consent to these sterilizations while being under or being in extreme pain and unable to fully comprehend what it is that they were signing. And the quandary here is in the question of whether this is protecting women or violating their rights. And the argument can be brought up that everyone is following the rules, everyone is respecting and protecting the civil and legal rights of individuals, but women are not being considered in their rights. While the prison system and the medical system is following the civil and legal rights that a woman has to full consent to procedures and saving her life, when there's a medical emergency at the front, it cannot be considered. And there is the problem that a woman might die on the operating table if this does not happen, or that she might get extremely hurt if this does not happen. So it can be argued that they're protecting women by ignoring their consent or not getting their full understood consent for this situation. However, one can also argue that this is violating their rights regardless. And this proves to be an especially challenging situation because there are other instances that come before the time that a sterilization happens that could really define the situation further. There are medical complications that might force a doctor to perform a sterilization might have come because the prisons were not adequately protecting the civil and legal rights of prisoners before. and women were not receiving the medical treatment they needed during complications throughout the pregnancies, or they were not being listened to, or they were being willfully ignored throughout the pregnancy if they were experiencing pain. And by the time they go to deliver the child, there are so many complications that they cannot consent to having sterilization performed on them. And that is where we really get into an ethical quandary. Wrapping all of this up, we see that the population of women in prisons is increasing. And we're hearing a lot of firsthand experiences that women have had in prisons and that they are having in prisons. And we're seeing that their rights are being violated. There are a lot of ethical situations that are occurring in these circumstances, and these women are not adequately being protected by their legislations. Here are my references. Thank you.